It's a pleasure to be here at the Mathrubhumi Festival of Letters. As somebody who introduces myself as to my students in Bangalore as a person from rural India, it gives me a lot of pleasure to talk about literatures of the rural, of the pastoral. Probably not so much pastoral anymore, but still rural. And to start off, I would like to ask a general question. This is something that I'm sort of, I think, echoing our previous speaker, Shri Madhusoodanan Nair sir, where he talks about, do we have a rural, small town fiction any longer? Can we afford to have it in the next generation? Maybe we can start with that question. It's an open question for all of you.
As long as there are cities and towns, the villages will continue. But it is a fact that villages are fast turning into towns and cities. But yet, I live in a village. When I started writing, it was, in real terms, it was a village. Rather, not remote as such, but with limited population and limited resources, no tar roads, no electricity, no water supplies. But we were content with whatever we have. The things have changed over the last 5-6 decades. My village, which I still call it a village, it's turning into semi-urban region, which is, I can call it a town now. But then, yes. But I think the lifestyle also has changed along with the physical nature. But I personally feel that though we have changed a bit, we still are villagers. I myself call myself hailing from a village. I ran a shop, so I'm a shopkeeper. Now you won't find shopkeepers, particularly with the globalization on, and the fast developments, you won't find that kind of shopkeepers also. I myself have closed my shop, probably giving way to the superstores. But then the face of villages is changing, but they will continue to be called villages. That's what my opinion is. Of course, others will have their own opinions.
For me personally, whether it is a village or whether it is a town or city, a metro, it doesn't make a difference. If there are humans and their story is there and it's a good story, it's always going to be there. Okay, the idea that will there be a village stories in future is coming to you because of the English fiction. All the people who are writing in English and reading are the product of metros. Okay, so for them, they cannot digest the village life. That's why this question is coming. But whereas in vernacular, till today, people read whether it's a village story or urban story, people keep on reading. So what used to happen in, as far as I know, is the village, generally any author you take, his profile will be, he will be born and brought up in village and then he goes and settles in the metros. So that is the profile of most of the vernacular authors, right? So what has happened is, for most of them, the childhood is in village. So childhood will be very strong for any author because he will be unbiased. During the childhood, you will not be biased. You will just observe the situation, right? So that's why the village-related stories were so powerful for most of the authors. When they started writing about the urban or the metro, they started, it were not so convincing because they have become biased now. So they are not in a position, they don't have the innocence which they had before. So for me, it's immaterial whether you write about village, whether you write about city, or you write about a moon. You create your own characters and write a story in moon or Mars. If you are a good storyteller, you can convince the author. Otherwise, no. So just like we say in the cinema, there is only two qualities: good cinema, bad cinema. There is nothing like award-winning cinema, commercial cinema, this genre cinema. So there is nothing like that. There's only two varieties: good cinema, bad cinema. The same way in fiction also: good story, bad story. As simple as that.
I just want to add that for me as a translator, my interest is in the language. the language used in much of the fiction particularly, that comes out of people who write about village life, because they're attempting a certain authenticity, especially in dialogue. It's very interesting because the vocabulary is different, the way of speaking is different, and from that language you can tell where their concerns lie. So I hope that does not die out, that everything gets flattened into a common urban register. I'll just keep hoping that is preserved or even reinvented.
Yes, that was one of my worries as well. When we tend to write in a standardized language, the exposure that we get in terms of vernacular writings is through mobile phones and other technologies. You don't go back to where you were. And for example, I grew up with my grandparents, and in Malayalam I knew hundreds of different diverse words that have died out, I would say, in the past 10 to 15 years. And I don't use them any longer, and I don't remember them any longer. And then somebody would come along and they would just use a word, and I was like, okay, suddenly, yes, this is something that I remember from my grandfather using or my grandmother using. I hope, I pray that such things don't die out. I hope there can be initiatives taken where we can preserve it.
Lijo, I have a point there for both of you. You are saying that the villages have a specific lingo, and that's the case with metro also. There are so many new words in metro which we also don't know. Even staying there for 30 years, I don't know many of the new words which are being coined by the youngsters of the metro. So you have to have that lingo as well. If you are very conscious about the dialect which you want to use, whether it's a metro or whether it's a village, you have to use the dialect. So that's not going to change. I can't write a Mumbai dialect and use a story in Bangalore. It becomes very difficult, isn't it? So that's going to be there throughout in your story writing.
So in such cases, what does the translator do? For example, I know that Ari Asher used a variant of Irish English to translate Vaikom Muhammad Bashir in order to reflect the register that Vaikom Muhammad Bashir used. Is that something that you have experimented with? How would you address a language like that, a text that is written in a vernacular, in a slightly different register than the standard?
No, I mean, with all due respect, that would be very artificial. You cannot really borrow a dialect from some other part of the world and pass it off as being located in this village or that suburb. Also, I don't think I can do it. So that alone is reason not to try. So you play with the words, you play with sound, you play with length of sentences. You try to bring in you listen. You basically listen to the way it's being spoken and see if you can bring some of those rhythms and sounds into your translation.
Yeah, the idiosyncrasies of the language. Yeah.
I wouldn't even call it idiosyncrasies, because then that implies that there is one standard and everything else is a deviation. Everything is unique in its own way, and I think it is important to maintain the differences without according one of them the privilege of being the standard version.
When you write, do you see yourself especially when you're writing about your culturally rooted context, do you see yourself as a character? Do you see yourself as a part of the narrative that is being told, or do you take the position of a critical outsider?
When story comes to me, it comes as an organic story. So every character has his own lingo. Every character has his own features. I don't think I have to work on it. Anyway, the process of writing differs from writer to writer. He may have a different way of writing. But in my case, I don't think I have to exert on it. When a character comes, if he's a farmer, he will speak the farmer's lingo. And he will not use the terminology which is used by urban people. Or a child, for example. Child will speak his child's language. So that automatically happens. But the only thing I'm concerned about, in translation, we are bound to lose a lot of nuances, linguistic nuances. Besides, there is such a wealth of idiom in our languages, particularly in villages. Now, they are becoming, senseless. Now, for example, we have in Konkani, we have a saying, Ventak Chuklar, Vamak Chuklo, Vamak Chukla, Gamak Chuklo. It's a proverb, wonderful proverb. When you miss in inches, then you are bound to miss in meters. And when you miss in meters, you are bound to miss a gaon, a village. So what I mean to say, these are the proverbs which have come, evolved from the villages. And as earlier my fellow writer said, Vasudhendra said that, and I agree with you, when the people who have traveled from village to the urban areas, they carry with them the rural life. And it is depicted in their novels. And I have seen this happening in Marathi and other languages. But there is also, I would like to add to it. One day, my granddaughter, who is educated, she is not in Goa, I mean, she lives abroad, but she wrote a story. And the story was located in Iceland. So I was wondering, you have never been to Iceland and yet you write, because she has read in Iceland, read the books on Iceland. So this is what happens. It becomes artificial because it is not coming from your own experiences. This is what we are lacking in literature. But I agree with you that with the passage of time, we realize how much we have less, particularly when you hear some idioms you heard when you were a child, when your grandparents were talking. The same lingo is not continued. But it is a universal thing. It will happen. It's a phenomenon bound to happen. It will continue to happen.
Mine is slightly a different stand, okay? I feel I cannot have every experience and I don't depend on my experiences. That is the early stage of an author. Now I have evolved. I can create my own imaginary world. So for example, my latest novel deals with Lisbon and especially Jews of Lisbon. And I have written almost like 230 pages about the Lisbon and Lisbon life and Lisbon people, not about Indians at all. So I have never gone and visited the Lisbon. Okay, and I have only studied the anthropology related to the 15th and 16th century. That's the time period of, it's a historical novel. So I studied all the available anthropologies related to that period. Once you are very thorough with the anthropology, so what were their food, what were their culture, what were their passions, all that, you can write any story with imagination and it will be convincing. Valmiki sitting at Ayodhya could write a story of South India means, why can't I write? At 3,000 years back itself, he has written a story and I am sure he has not come to all these places. Without coming, he has imagined and he has written all the story, right? But he is able to write means, why not me? So I should be able to write it. Only thing is you have to study the anthropology properly and put your imagination. If you don't believe, trust your imagination, your story writing skills will have limitations. So I am not at all there when I am writing a historical novel. My presence itself is not there. Absolutely nowhere. I can't see anywhere myself, right? Maybe as a narrator I might be there.
Vasu, Lijo had asked whether you write as an insider or as an observer.
Observer.
Now, let's say you're writing about a place and a time which you have yourself not been part of. So, which of the two are you? Insider
I'm outsider.
or observer?
Definitely not an insider. I will try to keep myself a lot of distance. When I'm writing about myself also, in essays or some of the stories where my Mohana Swamy earlier, it's semi-autobiographical actually. But I have kept the distance. I tried to keep myself a distance. Only when you have distance, you can look at both gray shades. Otherwise, you will end up with black and white. Right? That's why most of the time in novel, the narrator or the first person, he will never be a bad person. Very rare you find a novel where the narrator himself, which is written in the first person, is a bad person. No, you won't find, because they are shy to write that. Yeah?
In my case, as I said, every writer has his own way of writing. Process differs from writer to writer. But in my case, I think I am always insider. But I also maintain the objectivity which is required. So I cry with I laugh with my characters, I cry with my characters. But it is not I. I keep the distance, I keep my objectivity. But I am an insider. That is probably one reason why I cannot continue to write the next day. If I take up a story, I finish the story in one writing, one sitting. If I start at say 4 o'clock, by the night, the story is over, and I don't have to look at it again. That is the reason probably why I can do it, because I don't know exactly how to tell the process of it, but then I am an insider, yet I maintain the objectivity.
As an add-on to that, isn't it harder these days? You have said that you can write about any part of the world, all kinds of people, but isn't it getting harder these days to write for other people?
No, it becomes harder if you are writing anything about the religion. If you keep away from the religion and these nationalistic views, it's much easier because people have got broad-mindedness now. So they are ready to accept so many things and they're willing to learn the other culture and all. It's like, the various cuisines, like Italian cuisine or French cuisine or restaurants are coming to India. Previously, they never used to even attempt to taste them, right? But now the mindset of the present generation has changed so much that they are ready to taste another cuisine. That means they will be ready to read a new concept. So you should dare to write a new one. For example, I wrote the gay stories. That's the first time which came in Kannada. And I thought like it will have a problem for me. No. In the beginning, there was a hesitation for them to express themselves. Now everyone, mothers call me and saying, I think my son is a gay. Can you please help? So that's the questions I keep getting now. So they are open to understand and discuss those things. So you should dare to write something new. In fact, Anantmurthy used to always tell me, don't please your readers. Disturb them. Because if you are trying to please them, you keep on writing the same kind of a style and same kind of a literature. No, they have to be disturbed. And they think, oh God, this is something different I never expected. That has to come. So, and you have to attempt from that perspective. That's the way of growing also.
No, since he mentioned Dr. Ananthamurthy, I remember one quote he said. He said, our languages are alive today only because of rural folks. Because urban folks are forgetting their culture and earlier life. But in the rural folks, and he says he also distinguishes between the language of the baitak, I mean the main hall, and of the backyard. And he said he was more interested in listening to the talk that was going on in backyard. Because in backyard, what you heard, it helped him write stories and also added to his vocabulary. So vocabulary can be enriched if you keep your eyes open, your antennas also on to what is going on in backyard and the interiors.
So it's just like this. What happens is most of the time we are seeing the world only through eyes. Okay, so we forget that we have 4 other organs and we can enjoy through that as well. We give so much of importance for the eyes and we forget to listen the noises which birds make, or it could be something, it could be a touch, actually some other kind of a touch which is going to happen. If a nice breeze comes, what kind of feeling it gives to you, or it could be taste, everything you have forgotten. So while eating, we start talking so much, like we don't even enjoy. So the requirement here, as Anantmurthy said, you don't give importance only to the eyes, give to other organs also, then chances of grasping the word is much higher. Right? So for him, it would have been in the graveyard, so where because he has written Samskara, where he would have heard so many things. For me, even in Bangalore, Krishnaraja market, if I go, I get lot of lingo. For me, it's immaterial. I don't have the concept that village is better, either in language or culture, than the metro. For me, both have their own styles and their own respectable culture. We should be in a position to learn from them.
When it comes to translation of writings from rural and of course of the new urban spaces, do you feel that it is easier to translate to, since you translate to English, would you consider that a direct translation to another Indian language is easier because there is a sense of camaraderie, a sense of shared cultures between these languages, or do you find English to be, after all these years, Indian enough to take it up?
I don't think we've yet come to the point where we are able to translate into an English that we use in India. The English of translations is still a quasi-Western version. I've tried many times to be bold and say, to hell with it, why don't we use the English that we use in India and give it a shot? But for some reason, it hasn't happened, it doesn't work out. So because we're still using the Western variety, yes, there is certainly a distance that is far less when it comes to contiguous languages of India. But more important, I think, culture, yes, culture in the sense of feeling the same way, having the same kinds of thoughts and the same kinds of relationships, which we see across the Indian subcontinent. And this is not limited to India. It extends to Bangladesh and Pakistan and Nepal and maybe Sri Lanka, I don't know, possibly it does. So it's far easier to find the words for those abstractions because the abstractions exist, so the words also exist. The phrases, the expressions also exist. Sometimes you have to create things in English which can be very creepy. For example, in India we have this gesture where if I want to comfort you, I will just sort of run my, not pat you, but sort of run my fingertips across your... Imagine putting that in English. It's so creepy. He ran his fingertips lightly across her face. That's sexual attack, right? It is not a gesture of comfort at all. So this is the kind of thing that you do face.
I have translated from Telugu to Kannada and also English to Kannada. And also I have published more than 25 books. I have been the editor for all those translations from my publications. Okay, see, from Telugu to Kannada, it's very easy. I get even proverbs similar to Kannada. Whatever the proverb is there in Telugu, I'll get it immediately in Kannada also. I can bring that proverb also. But if it is from English to Kannada, it's very difficult actually because we don't have the terminology. I'll give you an example. I translated Into Thin Air of John Crocker to Kannada. Okay, so Into Thin Air, this thin air itself is not there in Kannada. We don't have that concept because our mountains are just 6,000 feet only. And of course, it's the same case with Malayalam also, I believe. So if there is no question of thin air in a state, why should they will have a word associated with it? Now, I have to coin that word. So I coined, I explained, and I would. That is one level. Second level is English grammar is so different from the Kannada grammar. They make such a huge sentences, and we don't make such huge sentences. We make very small, short sentences for the readability purpose. So I have to break it only. Otherwise, it will not be readable. So from that perspective, any Indian language to Indian language, especially Dravidian language to Dravidian language, is very easy. Okay, but English to Kannada or Kannada to any of these European languages is very difficult, and there will be compromises only. I tell there's one, this Life Buoy advertisement comes, right? So you use the Life Buoy so that all the germs will go. But whatever they say, finally they show that still there is one germ still there. That's how the translation is there. Translation, you have to assume that still one germ is there, but it is safe for you. No problem. So at least you have got a good bath. So that's the way translation you have to treat. Yeah.
I suppose in many languages, unfortunately, we do not have translators who work between Indian languages. It's rarer to see that. So it always goes to English and then to another vernacular. And that sort of takes the life away. I still remember I grew up reading a lot of Russian texts in translation in Malayalam. I've always felt that they were so lifeless because they would often be translated from Russian to English and then from English to Malayalam, which is, twice removed from the cultural reality and linguistic reality of that language, whatever the expression might be. Talking about rural or vernacular literatures, I feel that nowadays, particularly with what we call South Indian languages, of course with Bengali as well, we do see a lot of experimentation happening. For example, your work, Tejo, Tungabhadra is a historical fiction that spans across continents. And it has been highly successful in penetrating into what we call a market that is not willing for experimentation or change. The same happens in Malayalam. If we are to take works like Taragan's Granthavari by Benjamin or somebody, these texts are selling like hotcakes. Hot appams, I should say, to culturally root it. So why do you, and whereas English, in Indian English literature, I perhaps do not see that advanced a level of, or they are a little more, tad bit more afraid to experiment to that level. Do you think there is a particular reason to that? Do you think it's because the vernacular literatures affords you that kind of
That's because of the long history, right? English literature in India is pretty recent. So they will be afraid of writing anything new. For us from 9th century, Kannada first work is in 9th century, started with 9th century, but we have almost from 2nd century onwards, we can trace our literature being there. In the this thing itself, 9th century, when Pampa writes Mahabharata, he's a Jain. For a Jain person, he cannot imagine Draupadi marrying 5 people. Okay, so what he did, he made sure that Draupadi marries Arjuna only and all the other 4 refuses to marry her. That is his Mahabharata. And later on, finally, he wanted Arjuna to become the king of Hastinavati. So he said like all 4 of them, Bhima, the Yudhishthira and all refused to become the king. And finally, Arjuna becomes the king of the Hastinavati. So they are doing experiment from that time onwards. So we have a history of 1,000+ years for the experiment. Right? That's why doing one more experiment is easy in the vernacular. But English is pretty recent for especially Indian English. So not only Indian English, even the word English also, it's pretty recent. So when compared to our vernacular languages, right? So naturally, it takes time to do an experiment.
I can speak only about my translator and his works. When my translator works on my stories, I see that I approve the last draft. Because I can't trust fully another person expressing in the same language, and the content is transferred from one language to the other. I can't leave it to him. So what I do is I let him translate it, but I sometimes I don't agree with certain things. Then we sit together, and then of course I prefer one particular translator to do the works. I find others, they either over-translate or under-translate. And sometimes, and I agree, that a bad translation, even of a good story, can ruin a story. At the same time, a good translation of a bad story cannot save the story. But I take it, as a precaution, I go through the final draft. When I'm happy with the draft, I approve of it, and that is how I work on it. But then, yes, it is very difficult sometimes to get the same content into English.
How does the translation process, how much do you as a writer and a translator allow each other to express themselves while do you work together? Is it a collaborative effort? You have already said that it is, but as a translator, would you give the author enough space for that, or is that author dead?
No, the author is not dead. The translator is dead. I mean, the translator is not a person. The translation is this very strange thing where the translator is invisible and yet is visible in every word because it is the translator's choice mostly. But in a manner in which the translator is stepping out and saying, this is not me. This is the author. And when you're reading, whether it is Gabriel Garcia Marquez or Leo Tolstoy you're reading, the words you remember, all happy families are alike, all unhappy families are unhappy in their own way. These are not Tolstoy's words. These are Constance Garnett's words. Oh, really? Constance Garnett was the first translator, and yet we say Tolstoy. So the translator is present and yet absent, you know what I mean? So in the same way, I mean, when Cornel Aureliano Buendia, etc., that is Gabriel Garcia Marquez, but not Gabriel Garcia Marquez either. So the translator tries to step out of the picture and acts as a way of listening and reproducing. Now, of course, if the author is is a connoisseur of the language into which it is being translated and feels that they have a view, then of course they must be part of the process. That would be, who can vouch better? In fact, there have been cases where the author then goes on to make changes in the translation because, better occurrences, options appear. For example, Vivek Shanbhag has famously made changes leading from Srinath Peru's translations of Gachar Gochar to say, fine, this sounds better, let's do it. And he's gone back and changed his original work as well.
I believe in not getting involved in the translation. That's not my job. Okay? If I am translating, that's a different game altogether. But if someone is translating, so just because I know a little bit of English, that is my ego. It's telling that go and verify that. English translation. No, I don't want to waste my time. I trust the translator and the publisher and God. So that things will work out better. See, now English is there, so I know a little bit of English, so I can get involved in it. If they do it into French tomorrow, what kind of involvement I can do? I cannot. Only because I know the language of English, I'm doing this funny things like getting involved extensively with the translator, which I don't want to do, and it takes a lot of my time. Why do I waste my time in my own book translation? I don't want to. It's the responsibility of the translator, publisher, society. So they have to ensure that the good translations keep coming. So it's not the author responsibility to involve in the translation.
You've given me a very good argument to take to the writer next time when they want to get involved. Said, what if this were being translated into French? Yeah, sure. Yeah. You wouldn't do anything, right? So
why French? My novel is getting translated to Malayalam. I just don't know what is going on there. Only I trust the translator. Maybe I'll ask, if I know a friend, I'll tell, can you read and say, is it okay? If they say yes, I believe both of them. More than that, I don't want to. And it's very boring to read our own work multiple times, yeah? Who is going to read my own novel 2 times, 3 times? For one time writing itself, I would have read already 5 times, okay? So I'm not at all interested in reading it again in English.
There's a famous story about how Günter Grass, his publishers got all his translated together to meet him. And 18 of them. And that, there would be long discussions and so on. Günter Grass walked into the room and said, I trust all of you. I'm sure you'll do a great job. And left the room. And that was it.
What about translating on your own? What about translating?
I take a lot of time for translation. For writing, I take less time. For translation, I take more time. So actually, translation I do whenever you have a writer's block. So I get into writer's block. At that time, maybe my creativity doesn't work. And also, I have a depression problem. I get into the severe depression once in a while. 5 years once, 6 years once, I get into a serious depression. When you are in depression, the coming out of the depression is one of the process I feel is the translation. I take up a book and start translating it. Okay, so from start to end, I keep on translating. I feel very calm and comfortable. It's very challenging. It's like playing with the words. You don't know what word to use. And for translation, your destination language has to be good. Your source language need not be so good. My English is very weak, but that doesn't stop me translating it to Kannada. I can do an excellent translation. But my Telugu is bad, but I can do an excellent translation to Kannada. So you should have the destination language, hold on the destination language, and you should be a writer in the destination language. But source language, you need not be good at it. So it works actually. I have done a lot of translations, especially editing I do. So many editings I do, the translation work. It's an enjoyable work. It's a very enjoyable work.
Do you think a writer can do a better job as a translator than an external
translating
translator?
Himself,
yeah.
I don't know about better. Some writers have tried, but it is not a common practice across the world. So I'm guessing overall writers prefer to use that time to write another book rather than go back and...
I love to translate someone else's book. If it is a good book, if I read, I feel my reader should read this book. It's not there in Kannada. And I feel it's a responsibility of all the creative writers of any vernacular language to translate at least 3 to 4 books in their career. It's a holy act. You have to do it. Whatever the book you find it good, you should ensure that your readers read those books and sit and translate. It's a duty. It's a social service and we all have to do that.
Now maybe we can go back to regional literatures and what is vernacular literatures and what is happening there. There is this common complaint that I hear that, of course, we do see a lot of experimenting happening in terms of fiction, but when it comes to non-fiction, we do not produce people like Yuval Noah Harari or even Peggy Mohan in our vernacular languages. Why do you think that is? Is it a reader's fault that a reader would immediately go for fiction in their own mother tongue and non-fiction in... This is something that a celebrated author has told me.
Do you want me to answer? Sorry,
yeah,
I'm taking
ahead.
up two
No,
words.
please.
What has happened is all our universities' standards have collapsed. The non-fiction can come from the universities and not from a common creative writer, or just without any proper education, proper PhD, they cannot produce the non-fiction. All these Yuval Harari or Peggy Mohan, they all have done their PhDs and from a very good university. But all our universities, whatever is there in Karnataka or most of the states university has gone, their standards have gone down so much, that's why we are not getting a proper non-fiction at all. There are no people with that kind of a knowledge. Previously, they have written quite a lot of non-fictions they have written in the olden days because universities were good. Now, the universities are bad, their standards are low, so you cannot expect non-fiction from the vernacular language. Maximum, you can expect an autobiography.
So, I have a question for you, sir, where what do you think would happen to smaller languages of the nation? For example, Konkani. Do you think there is still hope for such languages and for great literature to be produced in such languages?
The Konkani has a particular type of history, unfortunately. We are divided. Diasporic people live in Kerala, as far as Kerala, Cochin, Mangalore, in Karnataka, Bombay, and in Goa. In Goa, of course, it is the home language, native language of the soil. And as I said, the languages always belong to the soil, not to your mother as such. But then people who migrated from Goa and settled in Karnataka, settled in Cochin, they have their own history. They learned Malayalam, and the people in Kerala, they learned Malayalam, adopted Malayalam script to Konkani and kept the language alive. Similarly, in Karnataka, in Mangalore, and other sites, other areas, they learned Kannada and adopted Kannada script to Konkani. This has been happening for the last 500 years. And in Goa, because there was a ban on speaking Konkani, ban on the use of Konkani even in speech, it continued for 260 and plus years. As a result, they tried to kill the language. They intended to kill the language and impose Portuguese on the people. So what people did is, they learned the Portuguese language and adopted the Roman script, or you can say Latin alphabet, to Konkani and kept the language alive. So we are facing a different type of problem, but we have overcome it. You can imagine 500 years of suppression and we are still alive. So I am very hopeful. But at the same time, onslaught of English, in the sense, to keep the language alive, education is important. Until recently in Goa, primary education was imparted in mother tongue. But last few years, a decade back, they changed the policy and allowed primary educations to continue in English, to start in English. So you can imagine going to pre-primary or kindergarten and in learning ABCD. Earlier it was going to from English kindergarten to Konkani primary or Marathi primary and then switch over to English. So that was a tedious thing. Now they have started all English. So in that case, there is a threat to the regional languages. Why this Save Malayalam project started? A movement, Save Malayalam movement was started in Kerala itself for the people across the world to keep the language alive. Even I don't think Madhusudan, the poet, was speaking the same language. Yesterday, M.T. Vasudevan expressed the same apprehension. So there are apprehensions, and not without any basis.
Do you feel that as writers who write in vernacular and as a translator who translates from a vernacular language to English, do you somewhere feel that translations are sometimes better accepted, better lauded, better awarded than the vernacular texts themselves? Is there a culture where translations are given more prominence than the original text?
That's the political actually. So if because English has got more power and English gets more money, so English is considered even prominence in English will be much higher, right? The people who are writing from 30 years in Kannada and one of the best literatures they have produced, and nobody in the India knows about them. But in English there will be one young guy, he will write one book and he will be a celebrity across the globe. So it's so much of inequality is there. Just because you are writing in another language which is not politically, so it's a strengthened language and it's not earning you the money, so you will be pushed behind.
So translation helps.
Translation helps because of this, and translation always help. You have to do the translation, there is no doubt in it, but because English is prominent today, it is ruling the world, so translation to English is much easier. So means if you do it, everything else takes care automatically. Very interestingly, people don't even recognize a good book which has come in the neighboring state. Like my book has come, so Telugu people will not know unless it comes in English. And English people recognize. So now what has happened? All these vernacular languages have become islands, and English language has become a bridge connecting all these islands. So you have to use English bridge only to cross to my neighbor state also. To come to Malayalam, I have to come via English only, unfortunately. So that's the state we are, but it's a scene today. Tomorrow if China becomes superpower, and Mandarin becomes this thing, nobody cares English. Everyone wants their book to be published in Mandarin.
Going by my experience, I find everywhere, in every regional language, every writer aspires to get translated into English. That's one reason is English serves as a filter language. Two languages, English and Hindi, for pan-Indian regional languages. These two languages serve as filter languages from which, or bridge languages for getting translated into other languages. Now, for example, if I write a novel in Konkani, it gets translated into English and then it finds its way to Tamil or Malayalam or particularly South Indian, and also when it gets translated into Odia or Samia. So this language helps to work as serve as filter language or to bridge up the. But then I don't think we should focus on getting our literature translated into other regional languages. That is of prime importance. If my novel, I was very happy when my latest novel went into Kannada in translation. That gives me more pleasure because people can immediately relate to the novel. In English, people will say, wow, what a novel you have written, what a story you have written. But I don't believe it in entirety.
As a translator, how does a book come to you, or do you go after the book?
Well, it works both ways. I keep reading and I keep my eye open for interesting works. But very often other readers and writers also alert me about books.
And what role does the publishing house play in the selection
Well, the
process?
Publishing house determines what will be published, unfortunately. This gatekeeping is so market driven that there is actually now a massive disconnection in English between what is good and what will be published. There is absolutely no guarantee that anything that anyone considers good will be published. They tell you openly, this is fine, this is great, I love it, but the salespeople say they can't sell it. And very interestingly, especially fiction is up against a different kind of challenge, which is the challenge of sales. In a publishing company, whether it is a big or a small company, it doesn't matter. The salespeople are getting much more money for the company by selling works of non-fiction, which are in the areas of self-help, spirituality, health, and so on. So very practical guides, sometimes impractical guides, but guides nevertheless. So they say that if with the same effort I can sell 100 copies of this book, why will I put in the effort to sell 2 copies of that book? So that book therefore goes out the window for the publisher, except they do literally good fiction has now become vanity publishing for publishers, for editors. They say, this is my list. They have this list of 10 great books I published last year, which is basically to tell 10, 12, 20 other people, look, my list is great, and the other one says, my list is great, and so on. They're wonderful people, and they're fighting an uphill battle. The publishers are not able to sustain good literature. The market decides, and the publishers decide on behalf of the readers. So readers don't even get a fair chance to decide on their own, because the book doesn't make it to the reader. So how will the reader reject it? You know what I mean? The publisher's already done the job on their behalf. So we actually are facing a crisis of literature as far as getting books out to people is concerned. And I firmly believe that this system is broken. And unless we can come up with a different way of getting books into the hands of readers, the whole reading thing is going to collapse. You know, we were talking about English, its influence. The fact is that no English book sells nearly as much as a Kannada book or a Tamil book. Malayalam, I'm not even taking into account. Malayalam sells in huge numbers. But a Kannada or a Telugu or a Tamil or a Bengali book will sell. So yet we talk so much about English being the big guy out there. But you're very lucky if you sell 1,000 copies of a book in English.